I still remember that day with every aching detail etched into my mind, a day that should have been a celebration. Yet it became a fracture in the life I thought I understood. Graduation, the moment everyone had been waiting for. The applause, the smiling faces, the congratulatory hugs from teachers, friends, and classmates, it should have been mine. But when I collapsed on that stage, the weight of disappointment and abandonment pressing down, the world did not pause to catch me. No one was there to help me, not my parents, not my so-called family. It wasn't just a physical collapse. It was as though the universe had decided to strip me of dignity in front of everyone I knew. My chest tightened, my knees gave way, and I could feel every eye on me, a combination of pity and shock, and maybe a quiet amusement at my misfortune. Some of my classmates whispered. Others looked away, unsure of what to do. But the most painful truth was that my parents, the ones who had promised me the world, were nowhere to be found. I don't remember being carried off the stage. I remember waking up in the nurse's office, the antiseptic smell hanging heavy in the air, my cheeks stained with tears I didn't realize had fallen. I heard a few concerned voices, a few sympathetic sighs, and then the silence grew heavier than the room. My parents arrived only hours later, flustered and apologetic. But the way they spoke, the way they hovered around me, it wasn't concern. It was damage control. Mari, why didn't you call? We were busy. My mother's voice trailed off, weak, like she expected me to accept a poor excuse as love. My father simply looked at me, a flicker of irritation crossing his face, as though my collapse was a stain on their reputation. Their concern was not for me, but for themselves. For how this would appear to the neighbors, to relatives, to the world outside our little bubble. I realized in that moment, lying on that stiff hospital bed, that my life had been a series of facades, that the people who were supposed to be my anchors were, in fact, the ones cutting me loose. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry, though the tears wanted to fall. I understood something fundamental. This was the beginning of a different kind of awakening. Weeks passed, and the graduation day continued to haunt me. The whispers, the half-hearted congratulations from those who once called themselves friends, the constant comparison to other students who had parents who actually showed up, they all became fuel. I worked silently, building a version of myself that they could never anticipate. I had always been clever. Mari, not the sort of clever that made people notice at first glance, but the kind that measured situations, predicted reactions, and calculated moves in silence. And now I had the perfect reason to test every bit of it. First, I focused on my studies. My parents had expected me to flounder, to settle into the shadow of their neglect, but I doubled down. I spent nights reading, learning, absorbing everything they had refused to provide. Scholarships, competitions, internships, I pursued them all, not for their praise, not for the certificates, but for the proof that I didn't need their validation. I began sending applications abroad, determined to carve a path that would make me untouchable by their indifference. Then came the practical part of my plan. I started documenting everything: their excuses, their neglect, their empty promises. It was painstaking, but each record, each photo, each screenshot became a piece of evidence for the story I was writing silently in my mind. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It was becoming their reckoning. I moved slowly, deliberately. People who had underestimated me, who had ignored my quiet strength, began to see the subtle changes. I grew more confident, more assertive. I cultivated networks, made friends who truly cared, who weren't impressed by appearances, but by action. I learned how to command a room not by shouting, but by the calm certainty of presence. And through it all, my parents remained oblivious. They assumed that because I had their last name, I would eventually return to the fold, begging for their approval. They didn't realize that every insult, every neglectful act, had been storing a quiet, simmering force inside me. The power of being ignored, of being underestimated, became my secret weapon. By the time I turned 22, I had secured a scholarship to study abroad. A prestigious university, a place that promised exposure, knowledge, and independence. I booked my ticket without consulting them, without waiting for their permission. And when I handed them the documents and the confirmation letter, their expressions were priceless. Shock, disbelief, and a shadow of fear. For the first time, they realized that their negligence had created someone they could no longer control. I left quietly, without a goodbye, without the tearful scenes they might have expected. That silence, that absence, would be my first statement. Every email I sent, every update they received from afar, carried the implicit message I was beyond their reach. And that message stung worse than anything else. Over the next 2 years, I transformed. My education opened doors I hadn't even known existed. I met mentors who recognized my drive and potential, friends who became my family, communities that embraced my energy and determination. And yet, the lessons of my past never left me. Every success, every accolade, every award reminded me of the silent promise I had made to rise, to achieve, and to make them confront the truth they had ignored. Graduation day in this new chapter of my life was different. I walked across the stage, this time in a foreign country, thousands of miles away from the mocking eyes that once made me feel small. I smiled genuinely as my name was called. Cameras flashed, applause echoed, and for the first time, the triumph was purely mine. No pretense, no empty pride from others, just me, finally claiming the validation that had always been mine to earn. I returned home months later, but not as the same girl who had collapsed on that stage. Murray had become a force, a presence that demanded acknowledgement, and I did not seek it from them, not yet. First, I wanted to see, really see, how they would react to a life built without them, a life they had tried to ignore. It was subtle at first. They noticed the way people looked at me, the respect I carried effortlessly, the opportunities that seemed to follow me wherever I went. I watched as their assumptions shattered, piece by piece. My mother, who had once hovered over me with feigned concern, now looked uneasy when I entered the room. My father's dismissive tone faltered under the weight of my quiet composure. It was a power that required no words, only presence. And then came the direct confrontation. They came to me one evening, their expressions strained, their voices coded in a mix of guilt and greed. Mari, we made mistakes. We weren't there, but we want to make it right. We want to help you now, my mother said, her hands trembling. I looked at them, the years of neglect and absence reflected in my mind's eye. Every hollow apology, every excuse they had given, every moment they had chosen convenience over love, they were all there. And for the first time, I smiled, not the timid, uncertain smile of a child, but the calm, unwavering smile of someone who had grown beyond the limitations others tried to impose. No, I said simply. The word carried weight. It wasn't just a refusal. It was a reckoning. You had your chance. You weren't there when it mattered. I don't need your help. And I certainly don't need your approval. Their faces paled. The shock was exquisite. For all their control, all their attempts to shape me, they had underestimated one thing, that silence and absence could be as powerful as confrontation. I walked away, leaving them to absorb the truth of their failures. But the story didn't end with mere denial. I built my own empire, slowly, deliberately. My career flourished. People sought my guidance, my expertise. I was respected, admired, and occasionally envied, not for wealth alone, but for the journey that had shaped me. Every step was a testament to resilience, to quiet strength, to the power of turning neglect into fuel. And yet, revenge was not just about success. It was about awakening a truth. When they saw me thrive without their interference, when they realized the life they had tried to control had grown wild and unstoppable in their absence, the sting was unbearable. They had created their own lesson, and I had merely chosen to live it beautifully, unapologetically. Years later, when I looked back at that graduation day, I no longer saw humiliation. I saw a starting point, a spark that had ignited a fire I had cultivated carefully, silently, and powerfully. And I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that true revenge was not about destruction. It was about living so fully, so authentically, that those who doubted you were forced to witness a life they could never touch, Mari's journey was not marked by loud confrontation or public shame. It was marked by the subtle, devastating elegance of growth, independence, and unwavering self-respect. And in the quiet moments, when no one watched, I smiled at the brilliance of it all. Because sometimes, the most exquisite revenge is simply living well. The following months were a blur of ambition, sleepless nights, and meticulous planning. Mari wasn't just living for herself anymore. She was constructing an ecosystem around her success, a network of people, influence, and opportunities that could never be undermined by the neglect of her parents. Every interaction, every decision was carefully calculated, yet it appeared effortless to the outside world. She had mastered the art of quiet power. Her career flourished faster than she had imagined. What had started as a small consultancy project during her university days abroad evolved into a full-fledged international initiative. She brought together young minds from across the globe, mentored them, and provided resources for those who, like her, had been overlooked and underestimated. Every person she helped became a living testament to her philosophy. Neglect and adversity could be transformed into unparalleled strength. Back home, her parents struggled in ways they had never anticipated. The society they once flaunted their status in began to shift focus. Relatives and neighbors whispered, "Mari is doing things we never imagined." She doesn't need anyone to prop her up. Each word, each rumor, was a subtle reminder of the world they had failed to nurture. Yet Mari didn't rush to confront them. She understood the elegance of patience. True power wasn't demonstrated through anger, it was demonstrated through indifference. She allowed her success to speak for her while their attempts to intervene or regain control fell flat. One evening, her mother sent a carefully worded email. "Mari, we want to see you. Let us explain. We were wrong. Please come home." Mari stared at the screen, reading and rereading the lines. There was no anger in her, only clarity. She drafted a response that carried measured precision. "I am thriving. I do not need explanations or apologies. Thank you." And she sent it. That simple act, so minimal to her, sent waves through her family. But Mari's ambitions were not limited to emotional victories. She wanted influence, recognition, and authority, the kind that could rewrite the rules her parents had once assumed she would blindly follow. She began taking executive courses, networking with industry leaders, attending conferences, and forming strategic partnerships. Each move was deliberate, every handshake a signal that she was no longer a passive participant in her own life. One of the projects Mari initiated involved transforming neglected neighborhoods into thriving communities, providing education, healthcare, and vocational training. She poured her heart into it, knowing that every life she uplifted reflected the strength she had forged from her own abandonment. It was an echo of her earlier triumphs. The graduation collapse that had once humiliated her now became a symbol of her ultimate victory. Her parents, meanwhile, remained fixated on control and appearances. They would occasionally try to attend public events, positioning themselves near her, hoping to reclaim some semblance of relevance. But Mari had anticipated this. At every event, she maintained a careful distance, always polite, always composed, yet unmistakably independent. Their presence, meant to intimidate, only highlighted their irrelevance. It wasn't long before Mari's work gained media attention. Interviews, articles, and profiles detailed her journey from a neglected student to a formidable leader. Each headline was a quiet dagger into the pride her parents had once flaunted. She had become the embodiment of resilience, intelligence, and silent power. Then came the final stage, the moment when her revenge would take its most exquisite form. Mari understood that for true impact, it wasn't enough to be successful. She had to make them confront the cost of their neglect. She orchestrated a high-profile gala for her international project, inviting dignitaries, investors, and influential leaders. Every detail was flawless, every element a reflection of her vision and competence. The invitation reached her parents' mailbox, but she didn't personally deliver it. Instead, she let it arrive through formal channels, giving them the opportunity to attend or remain absent. On the night of the gala, the event hall shimmered with lights and anticipation. The guests mingled, discussions of policy, investment, and innovation buzzing through the air. Mari entered gracefully, her presence commanding attention without a word. People noticed the composure, the quiet authority she exuded, the natural confidence born from years of self-forged strength. Her parents arrived late, expecting to blend in unnoticed. They imagined she would welcome them warmly, perhaps even feel gratitude for their attendance. Instead, Mari's gaze swept past them, acknowledging their presence only minimally, without emotion. To the crowd, she was radiant, focused, and unstoppable. To her parents, she was a revelation, a reminder of everything they had lost through neglect. "Mom, Dad," she said finally, her voice calm, controlled, and deliberate. "I hope you enjoy the evening." And then she moved on, engaging with leaders, discussing programs, shaping decisions that would impact thousands. Her parents, standing to the side, felt the weight of absence, the unbearable clarity that their child had surpassed them not by confrontation, but by sheer force of will. From that night onward, the shift was complete. Mari's parents tried to assert influence, but it was too late. Their apologies, their attempts to mend past neglect, were met with polite distance. They had lost control when they had failed to nurture, and now they had to witness her ascend without their assistance. Mari, however, did not stop at personal triumph. She understood that revenge without impact was hollow. She expanded her initiatives, created scholarships, mentorship programs, and platforms that amplified voices that were once ignored. Every success story became a testament to her philosophy. Adversity and neglect could be converted into extraordinary outcomes. Years passed, and Mari's influence grew internationally. She became a figure of respect, a symbol of resilience. Young people from across the globe sought her guidance, and she built a network that empowered those overlooked and underestimated. Yet, she remained rooted in the lesson she had learned on that fateful graduation day. True power was in silent perseverance, in the creation of life, not destruction. Occasionally, she would see her parents' reflections in public events, attempts at reconciliation, or subtle boasts to acquaintances. They had learned the most painful truth of all. Their neglect had forged someone they could no longer control, someone whose life now thrived independently of them. And Mari continued to flourish, guided by purpose, experience, and quiet strategy. She had mastered the art of living beyond limitation, proving that the greatest revenge was not public humiliation or confrontation, but the elegant and undeniable proof of one's own success. By the time she celebrated her 30th birthday, Mari's journey was complete in every way that mattered. She had transformed humiliation into power, neglect into opportunity, and absence into a life overflowing with purpose and impact. The world she had once feared became a canvas on which she painted her story, a story of resilience, independence, and ultimate triumph. And through it all, she never forgot the lesson that had ignited this journey. The ones who fail you most profoundly may inadvertently forge the strength within you to surpass them, to rise, and to live a life so full, so extraordinary, that they are left only to witness in awe.